Hello, welcome to another episode of Time of Death. I'm your host, Ris.
And I'm Dee.
And if you're new here, welcome. We are two nurses who like to talk true crime, and we like to focus on cases that have a heavy medical influence to them or cases that feature a medical professional as the perpetrator or victim. This week is episode 36, and we are going to be talking about the infamous Son of Sam.
Yes! Yes! I love this case. I'm so excited you're doing this.
Good. So
the Labrador told me to do it.
He did. Harvey was his name, by the way. So, Son of Sam is David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz goes on to kill 6 people, and he has attacked more than that. So we're just going to delve right into it.
Let's do it.
Richard David Falco was born on June 1st, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He was born to Elizabeth Broder and Joseph Kleinman. Elizabeth grew up in a poor Jewish family, and she was working as a waitress at the time, and she was married to a man named Tony Falco. Elizabeth started having an affair with a married man named Joseph Kleinman, and this man would later become David's biological father. So Elizabeth, aka Betty, she gets pregnant, and this causes a stir in the relationship between her and her married boyfriend. Joseph said, "Betty, if you keep this baby, listen, I'm not going to be with you anymore." So Betty gives birth to a baby boy, and she gives the baby her husband's last name. So Richard David Falco. A few days after Richard was born, Betty gives baby Richard up for adoption. Richard was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz. They were a middle-aged, middle-class Jewish couple living in Bronx, New York, and they owned a hardware store together. They had been having a hard time having kids, so they turned to adoption. So they meet Betty's baby and choose to adopt him. And they decided to switch his middle and first names. So now he would go by David Richard Berkowitz. So we'll be referring to him as David from here on out. So David was a lonely kid, and he would go on to be a lonely young adult. He was described as being above average in intelligence in his childhood, but he was disinterested in school. So while he was enrolled in kindergarten, David missed 46 days of school.
What the heck?
David had a lot of hyperactive tendencies, and he got bored really easily, so he couldn't really focus well on academics. He was bullied at school for being Jewish, and he really did not fit in well. When he was 5 years old, his adoptive parents told him that he was adopted. And they told him his mom, Betty, died in childbirth, which was not true. And so he really carried the guilt of knowing that he killed his mom with him into adulthood. He believed also that his biological father was angry at him for killing her, and that's the reason he gave him up for adoption.
See, that causes so much trauma in such a young age.
Yeah.
Later on, trauma can manifest in so many different ways. Maybe that was part of the reason that his life went the way that it did.
Well, you'll see later on, this really causes, knowing where he came from causes a lot of issues for David.
Look at Ted Bundy. His mom gave him, basically, he was raised by his grandparents under the guise of them being his parents. He never knew his birth father, and that causes a lot of confusion in their identity, you know?
It causes a lot of inner turmoil, and they don't know how to deal with that, especially when they're so young. He's 5 years old, and he's growing up thinking, oh my God, I killed my mom. And he actually thought that his biological dad, was so pissed at him for killing his mom that he was going to come back and kill David. Wow. So he was really, at a young age, he was really tormented. When he was 7 years old, he scored 118 on an IQ test. When he was 9, he missed 28 days during the 4th grade. And again, he wasn't really fitting well in with other kids. He was chubby and they would tease him a lot. And then in his preteen years, in early teen years, he was still teased again for being chubby. And here he's just still a loner. Although there are accounts of him teasing other kids, there are also accounts that he was the instigator and even assaulted other kids. There are reports that he did have some head injuries growing up. When he was 7, Berkowitz was hit by a car and he suffered head injuries. And a few months later, he ran into a wall and he again hurt his head. He was also hit in his head when he was 8 with a pipe, and he suffered a big lack on his forehead as a result. But definitely we've heard of cases before where people who go on to kill or commit terrible crimes have some history of head trauma, which I thought was interesting.
Well, it makes sense. TBIs are very complex injuries. And, and different people, it can manifest in different ways. Aggression and, even psychotic symptoms.
So true, Dee. Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
I'm so lucky. You're on a roll today. And, I'm so glad I got a psych nurse for this case.
Thanks, Ris.
And, maybe you should have been one to present this, but I'm glad I have you here for your input. So one day, while David was a child, he and his mom were in a public shower room. And a man enters the room and the women start screaming. They're all shocked that a man's in there. And David remembered this as the pivotal moment when he realized the power that men held over women.
The power of the penis.
The power of the penis. When he was 9, he began masturbating, which is a tad young.
Yeah, that's young.
I mean, I think it's pretty normal for... I don't know. I think for kids to explore their bodies around that age. David, just growing up, saw a lot of people dying around him.
Yikes.
One of which was a girl. When he was 8, a girl died in front of him after being hit by a car. When he was around in his preteen years, he also saw another child, a boy, die after falling off of a bus. And he also saw a girl and her mom die after being hit by a car. So these are 4 deaths so far that he's seen before even 14 years old.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Around this age too, in the preteen age, he starts claiming that monsters are bothering him. So he started sleeping with the light on. He also slept often with his parents, which, I feel like typically parents are pretty accepting of kids who want to sleep in bed with them, but his parents were a little annoyed by these. I mean, I can understand parents being annoyed by that, but this made them angry, and I don't know. I feel like when we were growing up and we had nightmares, we would just climb in mom's bed and she would just, it was like you didn't even have to ask, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think it just shows the strained relationship even as a child and the very bizarre dynamic that he had with them.
Yeah. So David's getting older and he began committing petty theft, and he's also started dabbling in pyromania. Basically, he liked to set fires.
Good God.
David says that he started over 1,000 fires just in his adolescence, and he would go on to set way more, and you will see.
Now, did he have any history of animals?
When he was 13, he also began to kill and torture animals. He killed a lot of bugs, and he did so by burning and gluing them with rubber cement. So, pretty gnarly way to kill these animals.
And that's a red flag. Anytime a child uses or tortures animals, kills animals, that's a red flag.
He killed his mom's parakeet. He killed it by giving it small doses of a cleaning fluid over a 3-week period. And this was attributed to him being jealous of the attention that his mom was giving the bird.
How dare you? How dare you love your parakeet?
I'm a human, Mom. That's just a bird.
You know what? I would feel it's just like in the normal, not normal, I shouldn't say normal. In a healthy mind, you're happy that, that your loved one has an attachment to something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so true. You know what's interesting, though? That made me think about, like, cats or other pets. Like, when you get a second cat, either the cat's going to be, like, Bubba when I got Wolfie, my second cat. I was so nervous that Bubba was going to feel neglected. But Bubba, like, is all for splitting up the... well, no, I guess he's not all for it, but he is very accepting of having another...
He's a mama.
Of me having another, like, attachment. He is a mama cat, though. That's so true.
Well, remember, like, they said that neuter males are, like, the ideal parent for cats.
They often take on a mothering role for...
I love that.
I don't remember where we read that, but they often take on a mothering role for new babies. And Bubba just, like, that hypothesis was proved to be correct immediately. He was like a mama cat mothering his little baby.
Well, they were so cute together. They're still so cute together. Cute.
So, also when he was 13, he had his bar mitzvah, and he didn't have any friends in attendance. Again, because he didn't really have any friends. So, Pearl and Nathan are aware that something's off with David. And he goes on to see at least one psychotherapist arranged by his parents. When he was 14, his mom died from breast cancer, and he was upset with his dad. I think Pearl and Nathan kind of hid the gravity of Pearl's diagnosis from him. So he was very frustrated and hurt that they didn't share more about it with him.
Yeah, that's a betrayal.
So after Pearl's death, David's academic performance was still declining, even more so now. So this is just another nugget of trauma, him having to go through a parent dying at such a young age. But Nathan, David's adoptive father, remarried soon after, and David and Nathan's stepmom did not vibe well. So things are even more rocky at this point, and Nathan and his new wife end up moving to Florida without David. So David graduates high school around that time, and in 1971, David joins the Army when he was 17 years old. And David said that he joined the Army. Basically, he was pretty lonely. And, he's kind of listless. He doesn't really know what he's doing with his life. And he's thinking, okay, maybe like the military will give me some of that camaraderie and structure that I've been looking for.
That, again, another common theme. Another common theme, man.
He also says he felt like he was on a special mission by being in the Army. And he also felt a lot of pride being in the Army. He was stationed in South Korea, and he described the experience as boring. But he was a really good shot. He was a skilled shooter, and this would come in handy later. So while he was in the Army, he starts using marijuana. He also uses mescaline, amphetamines, and also LSD. And his nickname was Wolf, because he was a pretty hairy man. And when he was 19, he had sex for the first time. He had it with a sex worker, and he actually ended up contracting a STD. He ends up being stationed in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and he was honorably discharged from the Army when he was 20 years old in 1974.
Honorably?
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
And so he comes back to New York and starts working as a security guard. That same year, David started being more interested in finding out who his birth family was. And he finds out who his birth mom was. And he was shocked when he found out she never died. So he reaches out to Betty, and the two began meeting up. And David finds out Number one, that he has a sister. And number two, he finds out the circumstances surrounding his birth. So he finds out he was born out of wedlock. And this is huge for David. This was a life-changing moment. This was a life-changing moment for him. It really altered the way he saw himself in a significant way. He found out that he wasn't wanted, and he felt that way especially by his father. The immense guilt he had for killing his mother was replaced by an immense anger toward the whole situation and his biological father. So David decides to go on to college, and he starts attending Bronx Community College in 1975. And by this time, he's 22. He's increasingly self-isolating. He was paranoid. He said he was starting to hear voices at this point. And he also reported a significant interest in Satanism, which was growing steadily.
Good God.
So David would go on to do a bunch of different jobs, but for the majority of his crimes, he was working as a letter sorter for the U.S. Postal Office. So we're going to get into his crimes now.
Okay.
So David only stabbed in one incident. He decided, okay, the knife's not for me. I want the gun. So Christmas Eve, 1975, David used a hunting knife to stab two women in Co-op City. Co-op City was a housing development in the Bronx. One of the women was identified as Michelle Foreman. She was a 15-year-old student. She was a sophomore at Truman High School. So David stabbed her 6 times.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she needed to be hospitalized for a week, but she did survive. The other woman was never identified. A body was never found. So we don't really know about that other victim. So David, after this, was like, okay, that didn't go so great. You know, Michelle, I stabbed her 6 times. Like, nothing was working. Let's switch to a gun. Like, I'm a skilled shooter. Like, this is probably my best option.
There was military experience, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the gun is less personal than a knife.
I agree.
You
And
know?
less messy.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to be in such a close range.
There you go. That's very true. That's a good point. Very good point.
Thank you. So prior to this crime, he was living in Bronx, New York. But after this attack, in January 1976, he moved to an apartment in a 2-family house in Yonkers, New York. There was a German Shepherd that lived in his building. Shout out Jack.
Shout out Jack.
He's almost going to be 10 or 11.
11.
He's
June
almost
2nd.
11. Oh my God.
You counted me on the day of my dog's birth.
Oh my. Okay.
Or my dog's wedding.
Where did that one come from?
I don't know. It just popped in my head. But we had an emotional recording session today.
This was an emotional recording. But it just solidified the fact that you and I are too good together. Am I wrong?
You're right.
If you hear Dee whining right now, she's crying.
Yes. I have the most wonderful sister.
Oh. Me too, Dee. I love you.
I love you.
We can't do it without you.
I can't do it without you. Or life.
Oh, yeah, life either. So basically, the German Shepherd living in David's building, and David starts reporting that he was believing that this dog and other neighborhood dogs were possessed by demons and giving him commands to hurt other people.
Oh, Lord, have mercy.
In April 1976, he moved to another apartment in Yonkers, but the dogs and voices still followed him. Especially that of his neighbor's dog, who we will get to know further later on. So David's mental health was worsening at this point, and he reported believing his neighbors were possessed as well. So these are actually humans that he thinks are possessed, is what he's reporting. On July 28th, 1976, he quit his security guard position. The next day would be his first shooting. On July 29th, 1976, at 1:10 a.m., David struck again in the Bronx, this time with a gun.
Oh, gosh.
18-year-old EMT Donna Loria and her friend Jody Valenti, who was a 19-year-old nurse, were sitting in Jody's car. They were chatting about the night they had. They'd gone to Peach Trees, which was a club in New Rochelle, New York, and they were about to part their separate ways, go home, get some sleep. They said goodnight, and Donna opened the door to leave, but she saw something unsettling. A man was carrying a brown paper bag and was moving quickly towards them.
Oh, no.
Donna got scared, rightly so, and said, "Now what is this?" But the man unveiled a gun before she could finish, and he squatted onto the ground, aimed his gun, and began firing. Donna was killed immediately by one bullet, and Jody was shot in the thigh by another. David turned quickly and left the scene. Jody would survive. She provided a description of her attacker, a white male in his 30s, pale skin, around 5'8", and around 200 pounds. She described his hair as being short, dark, curly, and modernly styled. Mm-hmm. Can I just say that's a pretty thorough description? Absolutely. Is it not?
She's a great, the powers of observation are strong.
Yeah. Plus, if you're in, a high stress situation like this and you're able to recall all that info.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Donna's dad said that he saw someone matching this description sitting in a yellow compact car lurking in the neighborhood for a few hours prior to the shooting.
Wow. So it was premeditated. It wasn't like a spur of the moment. It was just like an opportunistic.
Yeah. Seems like, from what I gather, he'll go out and he shot a lot of people in cars. And so kind of what I get from it is it is opportunistic. He'll go out, take a look, see who's lurking around in some cars and who he can pick off the easiest. So shooting number 2 happens about 3 months later on October 24th, 1976 in Flushing. And Flushing is a neighborhood in Queens. So David strikes again. This time, Carl De Niro was a 20-year-old security guard with long shoulder-length hair. And his friend Rosemary Keenan was an 18-year-old college student at Queens College. The two of them were hanging out in Rosemary's car when suddenly the windows started shattering. Rosemary acted quickly. She drove them away to get help. The two didn't realize at first that the shattered windows were due to someone shooting at them.
Wow. And maybe he thought it was two girls because of the shorter length hair.
You are right on it. I was about to get into that, girl. I don't even need to because you brought it up. God.
Wow.
You really are the peanut butter to my jelly.
No, stop. You're making me so happy when you say that. And they're going to be listening to this. They're like, wow, these girls are so freaking sappy. Peanut butter to my jelly. You're the cake to my fat kid. The salt to my pepper.
The salt to my pepper.
What's another one? Band to my aid.
The egg to the mayo.
Oh.
Is that weird?
I like it.
It's like
I do put mayo on my eggs.
Just like scrambled eggs?
Yeah.
Really?
With cheese.
Mayo and cheese? God, you're a savage.
Got me salivating.
Oh my God. You want me to make you some eggs?
No, it's okay.
I actually buy my eggs from a nurse at work.
Really?
She has chickens and I buy them from her.
I might need to do that too. That's really cool.
You can buy them from her. She's got eggs all the time. $5 a dozen.
Huh.
So, and they're really good eggs.
And they're farm fresh.
And she says they make actually really good deviled eggs.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I'll have to. Who is it? Or what's her name?
Melissa.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Okay. So shout out to Melissa's eggs.
Yes, thank you, Melissa.
Farm fresh.
Wonderful eggs. Very tasty. So Rosemary suffered superficial cuts from the shattered glass, but Carl was shot in the head. Luckily, he did survive, but he required a metal plate in his skull. So, like Dee, the genius Dee brought up, police hypothesized that the shooter thought Carl was a woman after seeing him from the back with his long hair. Both Carl and Rosemary denied seeing their attacker. Rosemary's dad actually was a police detective with the NYPD,
Wow.
and he had 20 years of experience. So the police started going hard after this shooting. Police determined the size of the bullets in Rosemary's car were .44 caliber bullets, but they also said the bullets were deformed, so they didn't know if they'd ever be able to get like an accurate match for like the kind of specific weapon that did the shootings.
That's interesting.
And they actually didn't initially tie the shooting to the last one. Shooting number 3 happened on November 26, 1976. Two friends, Donna DeMasi, who was 16, and Joanne Lamino, who was 18, had gone to the movies. And the movie finished around midnight, and then the two started making their way back home. They made it to Joanne's house in Floral Park, a neighborhood in Long Island, New York, and they were just sitting on the porch talking. All of a sudden, the girls see a man coming towards them in military fatigues. And in a weirdly high-pitched voice, he said, "Can you tell me how to get," but his voice trailed off. And then he revealed a pistol. He shot each girl once, both of them falling down on impact. And then he started shooting Joanne's house several times before running from the scene. Joanne's neighbor heard the gunshots and ran outside to see what happened, and he describes seeing a blonde man running by holding a pistol.
A blonde?
Yeah. So this is kind of later, I mean, we'll talk about it later on, but the idea that, okay, maybe there is a second person involved. And this just is a huge point of contention in this case. So Donna was shot in the neck. She survived, thankfully.
Wow.
Joanne was hit in the back, Joanne was shot in the back. She was hospitalized and survived, but she would be a paraplegic from this point on.
Now, the para is the one that can move the arms?
So paraplegic, yes, means they can not move the lower half of their body. Sorry. Shooting number 4 occurred on January 30th, 1977. Around 12:40 a.m., Christine Frund, who was a 26-year-old secretary, and her fiancé, John Deal, who was a 30-year-old bartender, were talking in the car in Queens. They had just watched Rocky and now were planning on going to a dance hall. But suddenly, 3 gunshots zipped through the car. John was in the driver's seat, and instinctively, he just started driving to get away. John did sustain superficial wounds, but Christine, who was shot twice, died later at the hospital.
Wow.
After the shooting, police announced the potential connections between the prior attacks and this one, and they were also letting people know, especially young women, that they thought the shooter is targeting young women with long, dark hair.
Did the gentleman that was driving the car this instance have long hair?
I didn't see anything about that, actually.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything about that.
When you hear Son of Sam, you think he's targeting the couples, right? I always thought.
He targeted quite a few couples.
But it's interesting that he at least was also going after women with long hair.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, he's like, we'll learn about it later on, but like women with dark hair, he definitely had a profile for. He did have like one blonde victim, and then he ended up shooting men as well if they were in the car with a woman most of the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't think normally the victim's profile changes often. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's really it's very interesting about his case.
Yeah, he's kind of like he's an interesting case, kind of like a very bizarre case as well. So composite sketches were released on the suspect in the 2 previous shootings. So Jody Valenti's description of a brunette male and Joanne Lamino's neighbor's description of a blonde male. So because of these 2 different sketches, police are thinking again, like, okay, maybe it's not just one suspect that's committing these crimes. Shooting number 5 occurred on March 8th, 1977. So this is just a little over a month after the latest shooting. So that night around 7:30 p.m., Virginia Voskerichian was a 20-year-old college student at Columbia, and she was walking home from school. She lived about a block away from where Christine and John were attacked. She was pretty close to home when an armed man appeared and shot her. Virginia lifted up her textbooks to try to defend her body, but the bullet penetrated her textbooks and killed her. 2 days later, on March 10th, police and the mayor make a statement. The same .44 Bulldog revolver, which is a gun, aka, had fired the same shots that killed both Donna from shooting number 1 and Virginia from this latest shooting. So this is like, okay, we're like pretty positive that these string of crimes are related. These crimes too are gaining footing across the nation and even across the globe. So very rising in popularity. People are starting to get pretty terrified. They're referring to the killer as the .44 caliber killer.
You know what's so crazy? Mom lived through all these serial killers.
She did. She knows stuff about them too.
I know, it's so crazy.
Like Ted Bundy, we were talking about him.
She's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I was like, damn. Damn. Alive for all this.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really get phased. Like, I would not, like, she lived her life. You know what I mean? I would not leave the house.
I know. I know. Crazy.
It is crazy. It's just wild to think about.
Yeah, she's out there living her best life.
Yeah, she don't give a shit about no serial killer. I ain't afraid of no serial killer.
She's too tough.
She's too tough. She's made of nails and old leather.
She's basically like a tiger. Don't you think? She's a tiger cat. Like, if she really needed to, she'd defend herself, and
she would defend herself and Lily
and our whole family. We went for a spa weekend, and Dee and my mom, our mom, were so scared someone was going to break into the hotel room, so they barricaded the doors. And my mother is like sleeping in line of the door, ready. She's fully ready to attack whoever comes in. She even put a chair next to her so she could pick it up to attack whoever comes in.
Oh my God.
You don't want the smoke. That's what my mom says. You don't want the smoke.
You don't want the smoke from Dory. No.
You too tough. You really don't.
She's only like 110 pounds. Yeah. Pure mean.
Pure mean.
Oh
so,
my God.
Shooting number 6 occurs on April 17th, 1977. Around 3 a.m., Alexander E. Zhao, a 20-year-old truck operator, and Valentina Soriani, an 18-year-old college student and aspiring actress and model, were kissing in Alexander's brother's car, who they borrowed. And they were in the Bronx, about a block from Valentina's house, which also was only a few blocks from where the shooting occurred when they were attacked. Someone living nearby heard the shots being fired, and they called the police. Valentina was shot once in the head, and Alexander was shot twice in the head. Valentina was pronounced dead at the scene, and Alexander died a few hours later in the hospital.
Oh my God.
Alexander was not able to describe his attacker to police before he died. Police did say that the same gun was used for this shooting as previous shootings. So now we're going to get into the letters that David, aka son of Sam, wrote about his crimes. So nearby Alexander and Valentina's bodies was a letter. So this letter was handwritten. It was mostly in capitalized letters with a few lowercase letters thrown in there, but there were quite a lot of misspellings. It was addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli. And in the letter, he refers to himself as the son of Sam.
Okay.
I'm going to read it to you guys. I am deeply hurt by your calling me a woman hater. AKA, I think he's trying to say woman. He just spelled it wrong. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young. Raped and slaughtered, their blood drained, just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody else, programmed to kill. However, to stop me, you must kill me. Attention, all police. Shoot me first. Shoot to kill or else. Keep out of my way or you will die. Papa Sam is old now. He needs some blood to preserve his youth. He has had too many heart attacks. Too many heart attacks. Ugh. Me hoot, it hurts.
Me hoot. Hoot.
Ugh. Me hoot. Me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy.
Me hoot, funny boy.
I miss my pretty princess most of all. She's resting in Our Lady's house, but I'll see her soon. I am the monster. Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. The women of Queens are the prettiest of all. I must be the water they drink. I live for the hunt, my life. Blood for Papa. Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill any more. No, sir, no more, but I must. Honor thy father. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong on earth. Return me to the Yahoos, to the people of Queens. To the people of Queens, I love you, and I want to wish all of you a happy Easter. May God bless you in this life and in the next. And for now, I say goodbye and good night. Sounds like us when we're signing off on this podcast. Police, let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. To be interpreted as bang, 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 bank, bang, ugh. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster. What are your 2 cents?
My 2 cents. Those are the ramblings of a very sick man. That's my 2 cents.
Oh, God. So police are like, okay, some parts sound like, he might be familiar with Scottish English. Example, me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy, aka my heart, it hurts, sonny boy. And in the too many heart attacks lines, also they're thinking that maybe David blamed a brunette nurse for a loved one's death. And they're thinking, okay, maybe his dad's death, because he's the son of Sam.
Huh.
And also throwback to one of the first crimes, Jody and Donna were both in the medical field. Jody was a nurse and Donna was an EMT. So this was the first letter, and it had such a sense of like grandness and like bizarre rambling. Later that month, some psychiatrists who were assisting police were describing David as neurotic with a possible diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia. And also they believed he thought he was a victim of demonic possession. One of the detectives, Harvey Schlossberg, made a profile for David. Loner, sexual deviant, sane, but does have schizophrenia, chaotic, messy, above average intelligence, skilled with a gun, and likely has access to one, and also between the ages of 20 to 35. The police keep this letter initially from the press, but some bits of it were leaked to the press, including the son of Sam nickname.
So he chose his nickname.
He sure did. On April 29th, David shot the black lab Harvey. So Harvey was a black Labrador. He belonged to David's neighbor, a man named Sam Carr. And apparently before he shot the dog, David sent an anonymous weird letter to Sam threatening Harvey. And David had also been sending weird letters to other neighbors and also some of his former landlords. And so people were kind of getting suspicious, especially in Yonkers. And so they start actually reporting David to the local police there. About a month later, on May 30th, a journalist for Daily News receives a letter. It was postmarked from the same day from Englewood, New Jersey. On the back side of the envelope, it read blood and family, darkness and death, absolute depravity, and .44. I'll read this one to you as well, Dee. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Sounds like the gutters of the emergency room is really what that is. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC and from the ants that dwell in these cracks and feed in the dried blood of the dead that is settled into the cracks. JB, I'm just dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous .44 killings. I also want to tell you that I read your column daily, and I find it quite informative. Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th? You can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria, and you cannot let the people forget her either. She was a very, very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think that because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather, I'm still here, like a spirit roaming the night. Thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam. I love my work. Now the void has been filled. Perhaps we shall meet face to face someday, or perhaps I will be blown away by the cops with smoking 38s. Whatever, if I shall be fortunate enough to meet you, I will tell you all about Sam if you like, and I will introduce you to him. His name is Sam the Terrible. Not knowing what the future holds, I shall say farewell, and I will see you at the next job. Or should I say, you will see my handiwork at the next job. Remember, Miss Loria, thank you. In their blood and from the gutter, Sam's creation, 44. Here are some names to help you along. Forward them to the inspector for use by NCIC. The Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell. John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. P.S. Please inform all the detectives working the slang to remain. P.S. JB, please inform all the detectives working the case that I wish them the best of luck. Keep 'em digging, drive on, think positive, get off your butts, knock on coffins, etc. Upon my capture, I promise to buy all the guys working the case a new pair of shoes if I can get up the money. Son of Sam.
I don't know what to say. I don't know. Like, that's just... He really does sound like a paranoid schizophrenic.
You know what, though? I feel like I get such a vibe that he's just basking in this attention. I think also because he's been such a loner and so kind of invisible for most of his life, or all of his life at this point. He's just like... like a penguin in the water, just like rolling around in the water, like super happy that he's getting all this attention.
I love that visual. That's a good visual. But I think it's true. Like maybe there was also some underlying personality disorder with the psychosis.
Yeah. So later on, one of the doctors, like a very popular doctor for this case, Dr. Abrahamson, he goes on to say, like, I'm pretty sure he's a psychopath. Mm-hmm. And he actually, we'll get into it, but he dismisses the schizophrenic diagnosis because don't forget, this man, he's above average intelligence. He really knew how to work the system.
Yeah, I think that's very, very apt observation. And I think that there's definitely there's foundation for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it makes sense for him to send out all those letters to lay a defense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he knew. And also it's interesting because police found this letter to be way more sophisticated compared to the first letter. Yeah. The misspellings are better. The handwriting was more sophisticated. Actually, police thought maybe it was made in like an art studio, or maybe that the suspect was like a comic book letter writer. And they actually ended up reaching out to some DC comic staff people to see if the writing looked familiar, which I thought was interesting.
You are amazing. Like, your research is amazing. Like who would even... That's amazing to know that you went so in depth.
What can I say?
Amazing. You are amazing.
Thank you. So, beneath Son of Sam's signature on this letter was a little sketch of various symbols. And also police are thinking like, okay, what does he mean by what will you have for July 29th? Is that like a threat that something is going to happen that day? That would also be the 1-year anniversary of the Loria Valenti shooting. So Donna Loria and Joy Valenti. Police are also like looking into the references that he brings up to help detectives along, and the Wicked King Wicker reference he puts in. So they actually end up doing like a private screening of the movie. It's a horror film from the 70s. So about a week later, the Daily News published this letter to Breslin, who was the journalist that he addressed it to. And Breslin urged David to turn himself in to police. After this second letter, police are like flooded with tips from the public. Panic is like growing and multiplying and just at an all-time high. Police actually start cutting and or dyeing their hair, or they're buying wigs, like wig factories or whatever, wig makers, wig factories. Wig makers are actually like running out of wigs.
Why are they putting wigs on?
Because they're like, oh my God, I have long dark hair. Oh, like I'm going to be targeted by the Son of Sam. Oh. And so the summer of 1977 was just panic fueled. And it was nicknamed the Summer of Sam. So shooting number 7 happens on June 26th, 1977. This is less than a month after the last letter. Salvatore Lupo, a 20-year-old mechanic assistant, and Judy Placido, a 17-year-old girl who had just graduated from high school, had been dancing at a club in Queens. And now at 3 a.m., they were sitting in Salvatore's car, talking coincidentally about the killings. All of a sudden, 3 gunshots whipped through the car. Judy was shot in the right temple, shoulder, and back of the neck. And Salvatore sustained a wound to his forearm. Thankfully, both Salvatore and Judy survived.
Wow.
I know. Neither of them saw the attacker, but 2 witnesses saw a tall, dark-haired male suspect running away from the site. One witness said they saw him get into a car and actually gave police a partial license plate number.
Kudos to that neighbor, man.
I know. So, on July 29th, 1977, exactly 1 year after the first shooting, police were prepped and vigilantly waiting for the Son of Sam to strike. However, nothing happened on the 29th or the 30th. But 2 days later, on July 31st, in the early morning, David would attack one more time. Stacy Moskowitz, a 20-year-old secretary, and Robert Violante, a 20-year-old clothing salesman, had just gone on a date. They were kissing in Robert's car under a street lamp in Bath Beach, which is a neighborhood in Brooklyn, when a man came up close to their window and shot 4 times. Robert lost his eye ultimately, and Stacy sadly passed away from her injuries. Stacy was the only blonde victim of David's. A few days later, Casilia Davis was out for a walk with her dog when she wound up at the same site where the last shooting was. She glanced over and saw a patrol officer ticketing a car that was parked too close to a fire hydrant, and then the officer went on their way. But a dark-haired man came out from around the car and was looking too closely at her, and Casilia got the creeps, especially when she realized he was holding something in his hand. So she starts running home, and the panic heightened when she heard shots fired behind her. Casilia was terrified, but she ended up reporting it to police 4 days later. So police are like, okay, let's do this. Let's check the records for all ticketed cars in that area. And they end up coming across David Berkowitz's yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy. So Detective James Justice calls the Yonkers Police Department to schedule David's interview. And the dispatcher who answered was named Wheat Carr.
That's a unique name.
Very unique. And she already knew David. She said, let me tell you about him. He lives right behind me. Oof. And she tells Detective Justice he shot and killed our black lab, Harvey, who belongs to my dad, Sam Carr.
Get the hell out of here. That's juicy.
Juicy. That's juicy. So Wheat goes on to tell Detective Justice that the Yonkers department had also been suspicious of David, especially after they've read his letters that hinted at some crimes that they've had in their jurisdiction. So Detective Justice is like, okay, say less, Wheat. This must be our son of Sam.
Say less. Get him, boy.
Say less. That's like my new favorite phrase. I don't know why I like it so much, but I just say it at work, say less.
You're so cute. That is such a cute phrase.
Say less.
Say less. Say no more.
Say no more.
Say little.
So, on August 10th, 1977, police find David's car outside his apartment. They see a gun in the backseat, which supposedly gave them a reason to go inside and search the car. And they end up finding a duffel bag with ammunition inside, maps of the crime scenes, and a letter addressed to Timothy Dowd. Timothy was a detective on the task force that was developed in order to find him. So instead of going in and confronting David, police wait for David to come out to them. This is partly because they needed a search warrant before they could go inside his apartment. At 10 p.m., there's still no search warrant, but David comes out of the apartment building and he gets in his car. Before he can drive away, one detective came to the driver's window and pointed his gun at David's left temple. Oof. And another detective comes to the passenger side and points his gun to David's right temple. A big smile appears on David's face, and he says, "Well, you got me." A paper bag sat beside him in the passenger seat. Inside was a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver. The detective to his left asked, "Now that I've got you, who have I got?" David replied in a sweet voice, "You know." Detective said, "No, I don't. You tell me." David turns to him and said, "I'm Sam." "You're Sam? Sam who?" He says Sam, David Berkowitz. Later, police discover he'd come out of his home in hopes of killing again that night. So, police go inside of David's apartment and they search his home. It was messy, and police reported satanic graffiti covering the walls. They find multiple diaries David dated back to when he was 21. Remember, he's only 24 at this point after all these murders. Like, that's pretty young.
Yeah.
And so all these diaries contain detailed notes about hundreds of fires in New York City. And later he confesses he was the elusive Phantom of the Bronx, which was the name given to the responsible party for greater than 2,000 acts of arson in New York.
Wow.
David is held at a police station in Yonkers, and then he was transferred to the 60th precinct in Coney Island. That's where his task force was. The next morning, August 11th, police start interrogating David, and it took only 30 minutes before he confessed to the murders. David goes on to say that Harvey, Sam Carr's dog, was possessed by an ancient demon that commanded David to kill people, saying that he demanded the blood of pretty young girls. David reports that the Sam in his letters was referring to Sam Carr. A little over a month later, while in custody, David wrote a letter to the New York Post. He spoke again about demonic possession, and he finished it with, "There are other sons out there. God help the world." So police again are like, okay, what? Does he have accomplices? Like, are there more killers out there? Like, do we need to be worried? Anyway, David undergoes 3 mental health exams, and he is deemed competent to stand trial. He is diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Dia, do you want to give us some background on schizophrenia?
So, yes, I would love to give some background on schizophrenia. So, essentially what schizophrenia is, it's a disorder that negatively impacts an individual's ability to think clearly. Their feelings are going to change as well, and then their behaviors. They're not really sure what causes schizophrenia. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, but there's a combination of genetics, environment, so nature versus nurture, and then brain chemistry plays a role as well, and brain structure.
Doesn't he's in like the age range too for like a schizophrenic, like his first. Yes. What would you call that? A schizophrenic break?
Yes, I'd be really interested if he was using any type of like illicit substances at that time, like marijuana.
Yeah.
Marijuana can, especially for people who have a predisposition, cause psychosis, especially for younger people. So essentially a medical or psychological, psychiatric, someone who dealing in psych, professional in psych. It's like a psychiatrist, psychologist would make that diagnosis.
Very good. Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
As always, I appreciate your genius brain.
So, and I want to just elaborate a little further. So schizophrenia is made out of positive and negative symptoms. The hallucinations, the delusions are considered positive symptoms.
Thank you, Dee. I always thought that was interesting because I'm like, what the heck does positive and negative symptoms? Like, positive means like you're adding, I remember from nursing school, you're adding something on. So like the delusions and hallucinations are added on to a person's mental status, I guess you would say. Yeah. And then negative symptoms are taken away. So like there could be like apathy or like
they're not showering, they're not eating, loss of interest. It's much easier to treat the positive symptoms than the negative ones, interestingly enough. Schizophrenia is, it's just like anything else. It's something that is on a spectrum. Other people might have more severe, and then other people might be able to function.
Okay. Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
So, like we brought up before, David ends up telling Dr. Abrahamson that he had contemplated murdering people for a long time because he wanted revenge on a world that he felt had rejected him. Dr. Abraham said that while he was mentally disturbed for sure, he was okay to face a jury. He reported no thought disorder, no insanity, no deterioration of judgment. He also said David exhibited a psychopathic personality. Later on, Dr. Abrahamson goes on to write Confessions of Son of Sam. He believes that David is obsessed with death, fantasizing that he was ordered to kill by demons working through dogs, and that he killed young women in order to spare them from the grief that they may experience if they learned they were born out of wedlock like he was, which I thought was pretty interesting. And you know what? I would be so interested to hear if his mother had dark hair.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? I always think like, I wonder if like he wants to, and also like a lot of couples he targeted, you know what I mean? Like, I wonder if he's like, oh my God, what if they, conceive tonight and they, I'm preventing this from happening, that kind of thing. But I couldn't find much about that. But
that is interesting. That is, I think those are some really interesting points.
Like, I think David is definitely troubled. Mm-hmm. I do think, yes, he fabricated, and he later admits to it, that he fabricated these claims that he was told to kill by demon dogs.
But you know what? Honestly, I have patients who, I would be skeptical. Just because he says that doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. You know what I mean? It could be that this is just part of, his mental illness.
Yeah.
Him saying, oh, yeah, it was all a ruse. Because it could, it could be true.
So do you think he was actually schizophrenic?
I have no idea. I the cat's out of the bag. Ris gave me the heads up about this being a case. So I did do a little research. And basically I have no idea. I think that also, I think that because mental illness is something that a lot of people don't get identifying it, and the treatment for it is not always as accessible. I'm more inclined to believe that this is someone who is really ill.
Yeah.
And in their own way there's a rationale behind it rather than them just being psychopathic. You know what I mean?
I know, I get you. So David's defense team advised him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, but David's like, okay, I'm not going to be doing that. And on May 8th, 1978, he pled guilty to all of the shootings. 2 weeks later, he was at his sentencing in a courtroom on the 7th floor of the building when he tried jumping out of a window. Shockingly, he was restrained, after which he started chanting, "Stacy was a H-O-R-E."
Who's Stacy?
His final victim, Stacy Moskowitz. I'd kill her again. I'd kill them all again. So the judge is like, okay, let's repeat that psych exam before we can continue with this. So another psych exam occurs, and David draws a picture of a man in jail with walls, like a lot of walls coming in. And he writes, "I am not well at all." However, regardless, he is deemed competent. And on June 12th, 1978, David is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for each murder to be served consecutively. The terms of his plea made him eligible for parole in 25 years. So that would have been in 2003 or 2002, 2003, around there. David actually sold his story rights to a publishing house, which triggered New York to adopt the Son of Sam laws that help stop criminals from profiting from their crimes. These laws intervene by taking the earnings made by a criminal and inputting it into a compensation fund instead for the victim.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. After the sentencing, David was sent to Sing Sing Prison, which is a maximum security prison in Ossining, New York. And then he was taken to Clinton Correctional Facility for physical and psychiatric evaluations. Then he spent 2 months at the Central New York Psych Center in Marcy before finally going to Attica Correctional Facility in Attica, New York, where he stayed for 10 years. He said his time here was a nightmare. And then he was transferred to Sullivan Correctional Facility. And then he was transferred to Shawangunk Correctional Facility. In February 1979, David said the whole demonic possession reasoning was a hoax. It wasn't real. It was all fabricated. David confessed he made up the story of the demon dog telling him to kill. He wrote, "It was all a hoax, a silly hoax, well planned and thought out." David said it was done to somehow mentally convince myself that there are some meaning, purpose, and justification for my acts. He reported being inspired by horror films like The Exorcist and The Omen. He said it was a case of pseudo-possession, continuing, "Let's say I needed to be possessed." About a year into his imprisonment, his neck was slashed and it required 50 stitches. David never reported who his attacker was, and he said he was grateful, and he said it was the punishment he deserved. One night in 1980, he had a spiritual awakening in his prison cell, and since then he became an evangelical Christian. He said he wanted to be referred to as the Son of Hope instead of the Son of Sam. While at Sullivan, David said he had joined a satanic cult in 1975. In 1993, he said he killed only 3 of the victims, Donna, Esau, and Sirianni, saying that other shooters were involved, and he was working with other cult members. So he was working with these other members to plan attacks and participate in them, but he didn't provide any names because he said his family would be at risk if he did. But he did name 2, John and Michael Carr. These were Sam Carr's sons. John had died in 1978, presumably by suicide, and Michael died in a car accident in 79. He also said a Yonkers police officer was another cult member involved. So viewpoints are kind of mixed in regard to whether or not he acted alone. And Maury Terry, the journalist, actually wrote a bunch of articles to argue that he had help. So basically, police actually, due to all these speculations, reopened the case in 1996, but nothing new happened. Technically, I guess the case is still open. David wrote a memoir and also wrote about repenting for evangelical websites. He also asked an exorcist named Malachi Martin to help him write an autobiography. Malachi was not into it, so he ended up doing it with other evangelists. So he counsels other inmates now who are struggling. He's considered a model prisoner. He had been eligible for parole every 2 years since his first hearing in 2002, but he refuses to ask to be released, and he accepts his punishment. His next hearing is coming up next month in May 24.
Wow.
He is 70 years old, and that's really his story.
That's interesting. It's really, I think it speaks volumes that he is not pursuing leaving, parole.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe he did undergo some kind of, spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
And, maybe he does have a lot of guilt and regret about his actions. I hope he does.
I hope he does too. But even when you were talking about selling the rights, and those are very disorganized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not the actions that someone who maybe has their facilities in order. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but also I think he loved the limelight and the attention. I think he was starved for it. So he never really got it. I think that played a bigger role than I think a lot of people think.
Look at you psychoanalyzing this.
I try once in a while.
You're doing a great job. I think that's very great. That's a great point. And you know what? Attention is a big motivator, man.
So true.
Such a big motivator. Ris, excellent case. I give you an A+++.
Thank you. Thank you. From a psych nurse, that means a lot.
That was so good. That was so good. And I loved that you read the letters. I loved that everything was just so freaking thorough.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I try.
Beautiful.
I try. Okay, everyone, we're going to call it. It was a long night. The time is 21:16.
Wow.
That's 9:16 p.m. for those of you who still don't use military time. Slackers. And we are going to end this night. I'm going to go edit and take some ibuprofen.
Good. I'm going to clean up the kitchen. All right.
Okay. All right.
Have a great night, guys.
All right. We'll see you back here next week.
See you next week.
Keep killing it.
You're killing it. Stay killing it.
Stay killing it.
Keep killing it.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.